Welcome to MATCHplay, where every episode starts with a spark and ends with insight that can only come from personal experience at the highest level. Let's tee up some good conversation. I'm Thad Miller. Welcome again to MATCHplay. I've got David Durm with me, a great friend, incredible business attorney and real estate attorney who works with me on a lot of transactions. And I just want to say thanks for being here, David. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Thad.
You know, as always, we start with a spark. So get that match ready, a literal match strike. While the flame burns, I'm going to ask you some quick fire questions. When the flame goes out, we'll dive into our conversation. Let's go. Let's do this. Oh, there we go. All right, David, what's the first job you ever had?
Walker Research. I was
That's okay. We'll just keep going.
So I was a telemarketer. I would call people who had AT&T service to find out.
So this is like post-college?
No, this is 16 years old, literally sitting in a little office building up in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Right. Yeah, a little cold calling action. All right. Yeah, all right. First golf course you ever played?
Whatever the little dumpy course is in New Haven, Indiana. That would have been that's where I got the
You started playing golf more like in law school, right?
Yes,
where you started
exactly.
Right, okay. And then college football or NFL? What's your favorite?
Gotta say NFL. I love
2-0 Colts.
2-0 Colts. With my son on Sunday watching the field goal go through. We had a pretty good day.
I saw a video of that, and I actually saw Cameron on TV on CBS. Yes. Best business book you've ever read?
Any of the Covey books. I think those are great. I've got a bunch of great takeaways, but I'm not a big business book reader.
That's fair. Begin with an end in mind. That's a Stephen Covey. And that's really, what I do in my business, what transaction people do in their business brokers. So that's a great segue. So David is a business attorney with Barnes Thornburg. You can tell us more about your journey, but we work together a ton. It was David's idea for me to franchise my business. He's worked with me. He supports all of our legal documents. He's a great friend and a great attorney and a great advisor to me. So it's great to have him on because we do these transactions on a regular basis, and maybe some things that if this is something you're considering doing in the future, having a great attorney on your team, like I mentioned in the first episode, is so critical. So David, tell us a little about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Well, Thad and I have known each other for a little over 28 or 29 years, and I've graduated from law school shortly after we met. So it's been 27 years in practice, primarily a real estate lawyer. Used to buy and sell a lot of shopping centers and do primarily real estate related transactions, but spent some time in-house with a couple of different companies, and then came back to Indianapolis and went to work for Barnes Thornburg. So it's been about 13 years, and that's when you and I started working together. And so even though my primary practice is still real estate, I do a lot of Amazon distribution facilities around the country, some student housing. I have a niche in which I'm rare in the firm doing dental, and also I do quite a bit of vet practice transition sales. So yeah, that's great.
And you're the college housing thing, that's like just fascinates me. So give us a sense of like how that happens. Like
working on a deal that's be close to your heart. I know you've got your youngest up at Wisconsin. So for about 4.5 years, we have been working to assemble a number of parcels to pull off a very large student housing project up in Wisconsin. The locals usually want to fight you. The university isn't usually all that excited about you competing with them for housing, but we do. It's all Division I kind of campus adjacent on Main, and then we do huge student housing projects. So like in Bloomington, over 700,000 square feet. Up at Michigan, we've got 4 projects which total over $2.5 billion. So it's
so these are old crappy buildings that have like a thrift shop.
Or just old residences.
They got a record shop, and they got half of it's empty, and it's all crumbling, and you're like, we're going to scrape this.
Yes, we're going to wildly overpay you for your land, and then we're going to put this monstrosity with rooftop pools and DJ.
I mean, every college kid needs it. I mean, you need a rooftop pool when you're 20 years old.
Well, as we've said, there's usually, you need a reason to get out of college. And so for us, it was housing, and everybody remembers just living in those dilapidated dumps that we all lived in. Well, now they have, golf simulators. They've got rooftop pools. They've got, tennis. I mean, it is truly stunning. Indoor basketball courts. It's crazy. And so why anybody would ever want to leave is beyond me. But
I mean, what's wrong with just living in the fraternity house or the sorority house? I mean, but I guess it's just not as good.
I just signed a lease for my daughter.
Smells like mold.
Right.
Yeah.
She's got it's like a glass lobby. My wife said it smells like a casino in Las Vegas, and the pool is on the second floor with the DJ booth. So
hey, that's you got to have that. If you're young and you're just trying to put it together, you need that.
Right.
Okay, getting back to business here. What have you observed in working with business owners? Because obviously you do this, but you work with business owners all the time. In fact, in your past life, you work with physicians, because this isn't just about dentists and vets. These are about all types. You work with physicians when they were working, before you joined Barnes.
Right. So when I was in-house, I was doing medical office and hospital development, and medical real estate goes through quite a bit of stages, but we are currently at that stage where a number of decades ago, all of the physicians moved off the hospital campuses, set up their own surgery centers, set up their own medical office buildings. And now, because of the way that reimbursements are handled and boring things like that, the hospitals are very incentivized to either acquire the practices and bring them back onto campus. But oftentimes we were working with those physician practice groups to help them work through their sale to the hospital, but then also to develop a surgery center or medical office building back on campus that would suit their needs. So we were doing a lot of that.
That's great. And then, but working with these people, like when they're about ready to transition, like this is their life's work, they put energy into it, their family involved at sometimes. Like when you're brought in, they're probably pretty far down the line, but obviously there's a legal aspect. We got to make this legal. We can't just put two people together and expect them to sign a one-page piece of paper.
Yeah, it's, as I tell people, while I do these very large transactions and they're hundreds of millions of dollars, and everybody's always very excited, doesn't really matter which side of the table you're on. Somebody's happy about either buying or selling. But when you deal with these individual business owners, the dentists who I work with, I'm usually on the sell side, but it's really fun. This is somebody's life work. And other than maybe a very large home purchase or something along those lines, this is the most significant transaction of their lives. And so helping them get comfortable, first of all, with just getting through the transaction, that's one thing, but also making them feel comfortable that when they do hand this over, that they're not off at their lake cottage or down in Florida and they get a phone call and somehow they're responsible for something that they didn't think they were going to be responsible for. So that's where the boring stuff that I do, the legalese, the boilerplate that everybody likes to refer to, those legal documents matter. And it's my job to kind of get them to that point where they feel really good and are cutting that off when they do sell the business.
Yeah. And in those documents, so if it's done right, if it's done, obviously buyer needs an attorney, seller needs an attorney. But as far as the seller, what are the biggest things in there that they're agreeing to? Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, like, obviously there's a lot of risk on the buyer because they're borrowing money, they're buying something that hasn't been theirs, and they're hoping that it continues to do well and continues to grow. There's obviously a tremendous amount of risk there for a buyer. But for a seller, what, like a reps and warranties, explain what that is, because that's such a big part of that document.
Sure. So imagine you have a widget company, you make some sort of, plastic thing that you sell. Well, you're going to sell your business. That process takes a little bit longer. If I'm the buyer, I come into your manufacturing facility, I do a bunch of on-site due diligence. I look at your machinery. I have somebody come in and check it out. We do a quality of earnings analysis. We do a lot of things. Well, when you have a small business like a dental practice where that buyer doesn't necessarily need to be known to the employees and the rest of the world before they really need to, the seller is going to make more reps and warranties, or in other words, they're going to tell you things about the business that the buyer is going to rely upon, because the buyer doesn't get to do that deep dive due diligence investigation of the business. And so with that comes some responsibility. And so what I tell sellers is that, look, these things you are making reps and warranties about the business, that you don't know of some faulty issue with that equipment. You have a rep that comes in and visits, and the rep tells you 6 different times and sends you emails and leaves notes behind that you must replace this sensor, something on this, because it's failing. Well, if you don't disclose that and 2 days after the closing, the sensor fails, well, you've breached your representation and warranty that you didn't know anything about that. But the contrary to that is, if you don't know anything about it, you've otherwise maintained the equipment, everything is in good working order when you close on the business, and 2 days later, some very expensive sensor fails on the equipment, well, you haven't breached your reps and warranties. And so that's what I tell people. If you don't have things sitting in a drawer somewhere or something that's very concerning, that a buyer would want to know, that if they spent enough time, they would figure it out, then you don't have anything to be concerned about. And if you do have those things, you are going to be responsible for those items.
Yeah.
And so it's my job to draft that language so that the reps and warranties are ultimately broad enough to get a buyer to feel comfortable that, hey, I haven't gone and spent weeks inside this business. But two, if I'm buying this business, I also understand that when I buy it, certain things just go back, they go wrong. You represented my dentist.
Oh my gosh. Tell this story. This is a terrible story.
The closing was on a Friday, and over the weekend, one of the water heaters completely ruptured and flooded the entire office.
A day after closing.
A day after closing. And so this is new flooring, this is equipment issues, this is all sorts of problems. And so, of course, the seller's like, well, am I on the hook for that? And you're like, no, sometimes things happen. And you made all these reps and warranties in the purchase agreement, but nobody had any idea what was going on in the belly of that water heater. And so that's why everybody carries insurance.
Right.
It's why you kind of protect yourself in that regard. And so that in that instance, the buyer's insurance took over. They took care of the issues. It's now a beautiful office, and so it works out really well that way.
And then the risks. I mean, obviously, what are the biggest risks? I mean, the biggest risks are they don't do these. They don't prepare up to closing. They don't clean up some of those items. I'm assuming if they don't have a great accountant and they don't trust what the accountant's doing, it'd probably be a good time to change that accountant.
Right.
Closing in on your scenario.
Right. There's really two things. It's one, yeah, you have all of these issues. You're not maintaining the practice in the way that you should. Now you're being asked to make normal reps and warranties, and you've got drawers full of things telling you that you've got a bunch of problems that if you don't disclose them to the buyer, you're going to be responsible for them. The other side is the other lawyer who's representing the buyer asks you to make a bunch of reps and warranties with respect to the equipment, and that puts a burden on you that says, in the event, if anything goes wrong, and they ask you to basically warrant the equipment for some period post-closing. Well, that's not market. That isn't customary. And that's where we as the lawyers step in and look at the documents and say, well, this is what the buyer would like from you. And of course they'd like that. That's ideal. But that's not what the normal marketplace would provide. And so that's where we make the changes. And again, it's the boring stuff the lawyers are asking.
Well, that's all right. That's all right. Yeah. And somebody's got to do it, David.
That's right.
I mean, somebody, that loves that kind of thing.
You're not going to see Law and Order Dental anytime soon on your television, but yeah, it's all right.
What about, David, you've always been in the real estate legal aspect. So if there's a business owner that owns a building, obviously that's a separate transaction from the asset. And that can be in the form of a new lease to the buyer. It can be in the form of lease to own in the future, or it could be just a straight sale. What are some things, from a real estate standpoint, do they need to do in advance of that, thinking about that?
Yeah, it's rare to find a business that doesn't have some form of real estate component associated with the sale transaction. So either you're leasing, in line at a shopping center and you are between Kroger and the barber shop, or you lease a building that is a standalone building in the middle of some town where you are the dentist, or over time you've acquired your building and ultimately you're either going to lease to your new buyer or you're going to sell that building to your new buyer. But, there's a lot of things that we can be thinking about as far as what are you looking at post sale as far as retirement? Are you needing the income from an office lease where you could use that for 4 or 5 years? Or would you like to just get out of the business entirely and sell that building? In which case there's some things that we can be doing that make the sale of that building much more attractive. But I warn sellers. I said, you're in the business of being a dentist and you're really good at that.
Just a business owner in general. That's what we're talking. That's our audience.
Correct.
Anybody. That's their niche.
And so whatever that business is, that is your business. Being a landlord is a different business. And so I warn them, when we sell the assets that go with the business, if you want to stay on and be the landlord, that's a different role. And the risk is, what if that buyer of your business and the business assets, if they don't turn around and ultimately renew that lease with you, or they decide to leave and go elsewhere? Well, now you're really in the landlord business. You are trying to find a new tenant. You are maybe spending
How
dollars.
specific is your building for a certain niche?
Right.
I mean, you can't put a Blockbuster in there. It turns out Blockbuster's not doing so hot.
That's right. You can find a lot of old Blockbuster buildings.
Yes,
still, but yeah, so that business in and of itself is very challenging. And so I just warn people that while that revenue or income from the leasing seems like a great idea, we got to be careful as to how long we think we're going to be in the landlord business.
Yeah. And I know you and I have built some, as an attorney would say cool, not many people would think it's cool, but some leases with that option to buy where a portion of that, lease payment goes towards a future sale of the building. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that's sophisticated to where, I think it works for both sides.
I do. I think, one of the things that's exciting when you see the sale of a business, and if you take, for example, our dental practices, it's oftentimes a young dentist who has gone to the bank. The bank has said, look, we are going to finance 100% of the value of the practice, but we're not prepared to lend you additional amounts for you to buy the building. But what we have learned very quickly is that it's usually that dentist who's bought the building gets very tired of paying rent and soon wants to own that building and kind of control their own destiny. And so
bought the practice.
Bought the practice. Right. I apologize. And
No.
So we have, and one of the things is we have those conversations about the business owner and trying to encourage getting out of the landlord business sooner rather than later. It's really a lease with a bunch of different options to purchase, and we're encouraging that purchase earlier rather than later. And so oftentimes, maybe it's a portion of the rent that gets set aside in an account. And so when that buyer exercises their rights to purchase the agreement, they essentially have built in a down payment for themselves to buy the building. And those things are very encouraging. And there's some creative things that you can do that, because your most likely purchaser of that building is the person who bought your business assets. And so if you can set up a very enticing program that has them looking at, yes, I'm going to buy that building, and there are already funds sitting aside that I've been contributing towards to make that happen, that's going to be a really good transaction for both parties.
Yeah. And I think too, it's also good if you own the building to get a realistic value of what that building is and what its best use is. As we all know, real estate is integral to what the business is in there. And you may have a limited supply. So you got to think about, like, okay, if I have a buyer, even though it's not as much as I think I should get for this because of the location, how many other people are going to come into that space? And you got to think about that and plan ahead. And again, there's different ways to do this. David's been great for me because there are a few different ways to form this. Now, getting into the lease discussion. Mm-hmm. So if there's a business owner who's in a lease scenario and they're wanting to sell, say, 3 years down the road, and their lease is coming up, what's your advice for them? Like if the landlord's saying, hey, I want you on a 10-year lease, but you'd rather be closer to your timeline. And but you got to have a lease in place for the new owner to come in. What's the best way to massage that?
I think the critical piece, because there's always some real estate component. So as I described, it's one of those kind of 3 or 4 scenarios. But if you were leasing your office space where you're conducting your business, the thought has to be, if your lease is coming up for renewal, obviously landlords love longer term leases, especially where it may not be easy to backfill or to replace a tenant very easily. But the conversation you need to be having is, look, there is going to be someone who comes along and who's going to want to take assignment of this lease. And while I respect you as a landlord and understand that you have lenders that you're ultimately responsible for satisfying, if this person is ultimately buying my business and they're stepping into the business that I have grown up for X amount of years, and they have the financial wherewithal to buy those assets, then they also have the financial wherewithal to assume this lease. And so you want to build in kind of pre-agreed assignment language, which allows you to not have to go and beg this landlord to allow you to assign the lease or to ask you for something special.
I talked to a client just 2 days ago, and in the lease he was going to sign for his new lease, it had language that the buyer of his business had to have the same net worth as the seller of the business. So
Right.
like in this case, it was dental, like a 25-year-old would have the same net worth as a 70-year-old person who's invested their whole life.
Right.
That was a clause in the lease, which would eliminate him from selling to anybody.
Right.
And obviously they got it struck, but sometimes that's in there because obviously,
and it's a perfect scenario for the landlord, because then as you come to them and ask for something then they get to create a whole list of things that they'd like to have in order
Right.
to be able to assign the lease. Now, the nice thing is usually if you get these buyers and they're working with really good lenders, the lenders want to see that they have the ability to stay in the space for X number of years.
Usually, coterminant with the lending place. So if it's a 10-year note, they want to make sure that they can be there for 10 years.
Right. Even if it's a 3-year base term with then multiple extension options that get them to that 10 years, that's what they're looking to have. And so oftentimes that works out for a landlord, because maybe you only have 3 or 4 years left on your base lease. They're happy to terminate your lease, sign a new lease with the buyer that gets them that full 10-year window to cover.
Okay, David, in addition to your multiple golf trips you take a year, what motivates you to keep doing what you're doing and motivates you in this role?
So I have reached a point where I do feel like there's less time ahead of me than there is behind me as far as my work life.
Isn't it?
There is a little sad, but the one thing that I have truly enjoyed, I have over time developed a great team that I work with at my firm, and for me, the fun that I get to have now is trying to figure out how to grow and develop my practice so that it's something that I can ultimately share and turn over to the folks that I work with to ultimately be young partners and then mature partners and with associates who follow them. And so we've really set out on a program the last couple of years where my business development is really meant to be team business development. So when we go out and we get new clients,
you're the head of recruitment.
I'm the hiring
You're
partner.
the rush chair.
I am the hiring partner at the firm. So when we go out and get a new client, I've got a young partner who's in our group, and he may not necessarily be responsible for going out and getting that client, but I give him some billing responsibility, and I let him know, hey, look, 3 years from now, when the next guy is up to be a young partner, you're going to share billing credit for this client because these are team clients. And so it's really been a different way to approach business development, but it's really fun because I'm not just doing it for me and for basically to support my family, but now I'm doing it to really grow and develop, young lawyers and build them up ultimately to partners in the firm. And that's really been the fun part for me the last couple of years.
All right. Look at you, mentor. All right. Final advice, David. And, this is part of the program where we get some golf tips from our guests. What's a golf tip that goes through your head when you're lately? I mean, they change about.
We all have a lot of swing thoughts. I would love to say that I've done a good job at reducing those, but the one that has stuck with me in the last 6 or 8 months that I think is super valuable when I find things kind of getting out of sync. So one of the things that I think all of us as amateurs who don't get to play multiple times each week, trying to figure out a way to get yourself back into sequence is always helpful. And so teaching pro and really good buddy of mine, Chad Penman, who's up in
shout out to Penny,
Booth Bay, Maine in the summertime, and he's down at Calusa Pines in the winter. He said, I need you to keep that golf club in front of your chest. And what he's ultimately talking about is the grip into that club and having it turn away from the ball as your chest turns away from that ball. It does a number of things. It keeps the club and your chest aligned. Your chest can only turn so far. So for those of us who like to swing the club a long way away from that ball and get it away from us, that's a bad thing. And so keeping it lined up with that chest keeps your swing shorter. And that's been my kind of go-to thought for about the last 6 or 8 months.
Love it. Let's see that in action.
Okay.
All right. Let's go.
Do that later today.
All right. All right, David. Thanks for being on, and thanks for everybody tuning into Match Play. We hope this was informative and fun. We'll see you next round.